There is a lot to cover and a lot of moving pieces. So let's get started with NBC News senior White House correspondent Garrett Haake, NBC News chief Capitol Hill correspondent Ryan Nobles, NBC News investigative reporter Dan DeLuce, and former special assistant to President George W. Bush and a member of his National Security Council, Michael Allen. Ryan, I'll get to you in a moment on the dynamics on Capitol Hill, but first I want to go to the panel here. Dan, your reaction, as you and I both, we were all reading the president's Truth Social post about his call with Vladimir Putin. Several things struck us in that. What was top for you?
I mean, first of all, what's interesting is he doesn't make any kind of threat or warning that Russia needs to, A, halt the fighting, or B, fear that maybe there'll be U.S. sanctions or more weapons going to Ukraine. So there's no mention of that. I think if you're Ukraine, if you're Zelensky, President Zelensky, you have to be concerned, are they talking, are Russia and the U.S. talking without me, without Ukraine? Will they be excluded? I think that's a concern. Another thing that jumps out is there was no mention of the envoy to Ukraine, General Kellogg, who's heading to Europe this week for the Munich conference and is supposed to be the point man. So that was also strange and surprising.
Yeah, I do think that those things were notable. Michael, does this, in your estimation, put Zelensky on his back foot, sort of in a defensive position, given Putin and Trump seem to have already discussed what the path forward might look like?
A little bit. I mean, we've been worried for months and throughout the campaign that Trump might try to pressure Zelensky into some sort of peace arrangement. What's happened is that now the Russians are winning. They're making incremental gains, not gigantic gains. So the thought process is shifted to what leverage does President Trump have over Putin to get him to the table? But what I sense here in the last 24, 48 hours is a breaking of the ice between the United States and Russia. We saw Mark Fogel come out. We saw the Secretary of Defense this morning in Europe say there's no way that Ukraine is going to join NATO. That enabled this call to occur here, and I just think you're going to begin to see more and more movement, meetings, and really serious negotiations about what to do next.
Well, even as the president says in this statement, they want to work together very closely. They want to visit each other's nations. Garrett, I want to bring you in here. What's the White House saying about this and the latest iteration of the Trump-Putin relationship?
Well, look, Allie, I think there are people at the White House who are probably discovering this in real time as we are today. It was pretty closely held. How all of this was going on with Russia over the last 24 hours or so, and I want to step back a little bit and relate these things, because you cannot possibly overstate the enormity of the shift that this conversation, that this Truth Social post represents in how the U.S. is treating Russia. Promises to visit these countries, naming a delegation to engage in negotiations about the future of Ukraine, something that the president's been telegraphing for quite some time, by the way. But I do think this started, or at least the jumping off point, was the Fogel release. I was on the phone with an official about an hour ago talking about the exchange that took place here and the idea that the White House felt like there was a goodwill gesture here by the Russians, that this was the kind of thing that might start things moving. And I asked this person on the phone, what will the next step look like? Is there some low-level delegation? Is there something that's going to happen to kind of continue to build incrementally on this trust? And I should have thought bigger, because we're seeing it here in real time. And we've seen with Donald Trump so many times in the past. Think about North Korea in the first term, where he jumps right to that leader-to-leader engagement, the way that he likes to deal with foreign leaders. And in this call, you see the kind of fruits of that sort of small bit of trust building, the policy shifts that have been discussed for the duration of the Trump administration and the Trump campaign, kind of layering on top of each other to create what I think Trump and the White House hopes will be a relationship with Putin that can be used to end the war.
Michael, from your perch, having worked in these national security situations, building on trust makes sense, especially for the way that Trump himself relies on his personal relationships to do diplomacy. But this has been a long-standing, tenuous relationship between the United States and Russia.
It really has. It goes back many years, of course, since at least their invasion of Ukraine, the first time in 2014 by taking Crimea. It obviously went really off the road during the Biden administration. We always know about Trump that he wants to get sort of the great power relationships right, even when it makes some of the foreign policy folks in town a little bit nervous. But he's moving forward. I'd almost call them confidence-building measures. It's a costless gesture from Trump to be able to sort of acknowledge that there's no way Ukraine's going to get out of NATO, and it's easy for Putin to be able to release a hostage. So this is just sort of a step-by-step. Let's see how far this goes. And I think Putin and Trump are going to get together in the near future, and that will be a spectacle to behold.